That's it.
It's a pretty extraordinary act. Whether or not this actually happened, I do have some questions, because if the Persians arrive and the Naxians have already figured it out, and they've prepared defenses, and the expedition fails, Megabartes' name is also on this campaign as well. So whether he'd sort of betray his own forces and commit to doing this action, it's a bit unclear, but people do crazy things when they're absolutely raging. So it's not impossible, but I do have my skepticisms about this. But all in all, the campaign is a failure because the Naxians already know they're coming. They shut the gates the moment these exiles come back. There's clearly no public support for the restoration of the previous regime, and so the
I
Persian
guess
expedition,
the exiles were definitely exiles.
yeah, the exiles remain exiles, and the Great Persian armament returns back to Ionia. And this is where Aristagoras' mind begins to start acting in overdrive, because he's just pissed off he's just angered a Persian minor royal. He's also wasted about 200 ships and all of the money needed to pay for them, and all the soldiers from Artaphernes, promising an easy fight, which proceeded not to happen.
So he's pissed off two members of the royal court, pretty
Yeah.
much.
So his political situation right now is extremely precarious, because it's unclear whether the Persians, once word reaches to Susa and the Great King hears about this, whether he's going to remain in control of Miletus. So he hatches a scheme, supposedly, according to Herodotus. He gathers everyone in his faction into a meeting in Miletus, and they begin discussing a revolt against Persian rule. However, Miletus isn't strong enough to fight Persia all by itself. It does need external help from all of the other Ionian cities, and also it would also help to get the mainland Greeks involved. While they're debating the merits of whether to revolt or not, a messenger comes running into the room, and the messenger claims to be from the tyrant of Miletus, Histiaeus himself, Aristagoras' father-in-law, all the way from Susa. And rather interestingly, the messenger bids him to give his head a bit of a shave, because he's got a bit of a mullet that he could do with a haircut. They shave this guy's head, and what do you know? It's a coded message from Histiaeus telling them to begin a revolt. This is a pretty interesting story, because the idea is that Histiaeus shaved this guy's head. He wasn't bald originally. He shaved his head for like once the first time. Tattooed a message, a coded message, bidding his city to revolt, and basically waited, hiding this guy in the Persian court for probably a few months, waiting for the hair to grow back, and then sends him all the way back to Miletus. And at the very perfect moment when Aristagoras is considering a revolt, this guy appears. They shave his head. What do you know? Histiaeus has bid them to revolt. So it seems a little bit convenient, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. So with this decided, Aristagoras instigates the Ionian revolt, and so he convinces the Milesians to rise up against the Persians, and he starts quickly going around and securing the Ionian generals who had previously served on the Naxian campaign, as well as ousting all of the tyrants in Ionia, in the Ionian cities, because all of these tyrants had been maintaining their positions by sort of supporting the Persians. They oust the tyrants. Herodotus rather amusingly says that Aristagoras pretends to institute democracy in all of the Ionian cities.
Freedom and liberation, the
Although,
typical things.
to be fair to Aristagoras, as you'll see, he does end up acquiring a very bad reputation. However, the actual text does say he ousted these tyrants. They were either expelled or the Ionian populations of each city then killed the tyrants who had been ruling them. But he never actually says what replaced them, other than he pretended to institute democracy. And given that he doesn't actually pick anyone to replace them, it's I would say it's a pretty fair assumption that some form of quasi-democracy or some hybrid regime combining both council, oligarchic rule, and democratic rule ends up arising. Because hybrid regimes do tend to be the sort of norm in the Greek world, at least according to Aristotle. But now at this point, all of Ionia is an outright revolt. But even with the entire region in revolt, they do still need external help. So Aristagoras gets on a ship and sails to the mainland in order to court the Greek cities of the mainland, namely Sparta and Athens. He comes to Athens and he presents his case to the king Cleomenes. He sort of says the Persians are an easy mark. They don't even wear bronze armor. They're walking around in these robes of these spears and these bows, and you'll definitely be able to take them. And he brings up this massive bronze map of the sort of known world, and he's pointing to different regions in Anatolia. So Lydia, you'll have loads of riches there. Or Caria, think of all of the harvests and think of all of the sort of how many goats you'll be able to get, able to
How
loot
many you can
from all
sacrifice.
these. Yeah, think about all of the loot you can get from Asia, and it's all guarded by these men who don't even wear bronze armor like you people. So should be a
I guess
pretty easy
this
fight.
the image I think shows what he wants to portray, right?
Yeah,
And Cleomenes' reaction when he's explained how far a distance
yeah.
these are.
Cleomenes basically
Honestly,
says,
I
"Give me
just
3 days to think this over." 3 days, fair enough. And clearly he's thinking in his mind, okay, what are the necessary logistical factors, and consulting with his advisors. 3 days passes, and he calls back Aristagoras and he asks, by the way, how far away are these sort of wealthy cities occupied by men in robes? How far are they away from the sea? And he says, he, as Herodotus says, he made the mistake of being honest for the first time in his life. And he gives the actual distance, and they're obviously very far away from the sea. Although I
I
will
think
say, in Aristagoras' defense, it's not that bad because at this point the Persians have built the Great King's Road, so you can easily go from the coast to inland relatively straightforwardly just by following this main very well paved road. But but Cleomenes immediately rejects the expedition out of hand. He doesn't want anything to do with this.
I think I'll just say one thing. The way you're describing Aristogoras, no wonder the Age of Empires campaign Glory for Battle for Greece, he sounded so unhinged in the game commentary.
Yeah, that is the reputation you get from Herodotus's account, and I think it's an important thing of history to remember that it is a historian looking at a revolt that failed, and so he has that benefit of hindsight. And when you have hindsight, you can easily start looking for scapegoats. And as I said, a trip from the coast to an inland Persian city like Sardis is not that tenuous, depending on which roads you're using. So in Aristagoras' defense, it's uh, it's not that bad, especially if you've secured the territory around the countryside, and which the Ionians end up doing because basically almost all of the western periphery of Asia comes into open rebellion. And he's and Aristagoras continues trying to appeal to Cleomenes. He does the little trick that ancient Greek politicians like to use, where they use supplication in an attempt to sort of convince someone to sort of take pity on them and give them help. It's sort of feigning vulnerability, and supplication is actually it's a divinely authorized thing that the Greeks do. It's it's where you touch the knee of a person, appealing to them. You appeal to the gods, and because the gods, particularly Zeus, are the sort of great protectors of supplicants. So you do have to take them seriously.
It's also like
However,
massaging the ego and saying
yeah,
that, oh yeah, I respect you so much. Please help me.
yeah,
You're
it's a big public act. It's the big guns of desperation and also publicity as well, because he's sort of like appealing to them publicly, appealing to the gods, and making sure that everyone is sort of has this on their mind, that there's a record, an account that everyone can remember that he at least did this uh, for the future. But it doesn't work.